Welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and man, we have another show lined up for y'all. Today, we have a true honor talking to Joseph Bolton. Man, you want to talk about good stories, good times? Well, we're going to learn all about the power of narrative because, man, he has a brilliant website you need to go check out, oldgrandmotherstree.com. And we're going to learn about what he does because when it comes to being a master of narrative arts, a true weaver of words, if you will, and a seeker of stories, Joseph Bolton is your guy. So we're going to learn not just about his voice behind the website, oldgrandmotherstree.com, but we're going to learn how he captures the unseen, the unheard, and unforgettable, transforming everyday lives into timeless tales. So first and foremost, man, I know you clear your calendar to be on the show, man. So how you doing, Joseph?
I'm doing very well today. Doing very well. Glad to
Thank
be
you
here.
for just not just sharing this project with us, but you have so many things that people can entertain themselves with and appreciate on the website. So kind of just tell us what was the story behind creating the website, oldgrandmotherstree.com.
Well, oldgrandmotherstree.com is the website for a brand new book series that I wrote called Old Grandmother's Tree. And right now it's a series of two books. And but it's a very unique project. Now, what I did was I retold the story of my French Canadian ancestors on my mom's side, as well as some Algonquin ancestors from Quebec. And I retold it using the language of a folk tale. Now, many people have written like historical fiction about their ancestors, especially if they're well known ancestors. But what makes this a little different was not only is it a mix of a folk tale, but it's also illustrated with 450 full color illustrations. It's almost like a graphic novel. So I've got a mix of between the two volumes that are existing right now, 40,000 words, over 10 stories, and 450 full color illustrations. And in that part, I was very blessed to work with a very talented artist named Natasha Pelly Smith. She's an artist based out of Toronto, up there in Canada. And we created this project to retell the story of my ancestors. And the old grandmother, in particular, was an Algonquin woman named Mitio Goku, and she's like my ninth great grandmother. And her story really inspired me to create the series and to talk about how she overcame adversity in her when she was a young adult and how she ended up at the end of her life. So, what her background is that in the mid 1600s in Quebec, she was living in a village, an Algonquin village, and she was married to another Algonquin man named Assabavish. They had two small children, and the Mohawks came up from New York north into Quebec. They raided the settlement, and her husband was killed, and her two children were kidnapped by the Mohawks, and she never saw them again. She never knew what ever happened to them. And here she is at 22 years old. She lost everything. She lost her husband. She lost her children, and yet she didn't give in to despair. And 5 years later, she married a French settler named Pierre Cauc, and together they became my ninth great grandparents. And at the end of her life, the priest up there, the French priest up in Trois-Rivières, wrote this about her when she right a day or two after she passed away. And he wrote, Mitio Goku lived a full life with dignity, respect, and love, a courageous and loving Algonquin woman. And there's when you read that statement and you think that's a very beautiful eulogy, and it's only done in two lines, but yet it says so much about there must have been an incredible life that happened in between that time period when she lost her first husband and her first two children, all the way to the end of her life. That was a life of dignity, respect, courage, and love. And so, using that statement, I recreated her as a character in these stories, and these stories tell about her life. Um, but also the life of her children and grandchildren and descendants. And as I said, like folk tales. So I have her interacting with indigenous folk tale characters, trickster animal characters, based on First Nation trickster animal characters, as well as a reimagined magical Quebec. So it's a mix of fantasy and real history.
That's amazing that she sparked that much flame in you. Because when you think about the creative process, has some of that come from just knowing about your grandmother? Is some of that juice coming from just knowing the type of person she was?
Yeah, I really do believe that at times she kind of really directly inspired how she was portrayed in the stories. Now I can't really explain how that was possible or how that works, but I really felt that way at times. And also Natasha, as the artist, felt that way as she recreated the visual characterization of Mitio Goku. And we kind of believe that what we have in the illustrations actually represents something of her as a historic person. And yeah, so the stories are very imaginative in the adventures they have. But some of the stories, because you're dealing with trickster animal characters, some are kind of funny and farcical. Other stories, because you're dealing with issues about love and renewal in a life after a tragedy. So the stories are very poignant and thoughtful. So it's a real mix. But overall, all the stories, one of the most important things we did when we created is that we have a book series that's very entertaining as well as instructive. And like folktales, folktales are a universal language. All cultures throughout the world have folktales. And one of the things that make they have in common is that they always address the human condition. How to live a virtuous life, how to avoid making mistakes. There's always a lesson learned in folktales, but they're also very entertaining. And so in these stories, we kind of incorporated that element in it also. So these stories in Old Grandmother's Tree are not only entertaining, but they're also kind of instructive because they do talk about the human life and how to live well, and how to overcome adversity.
When you look at building a series of anything, there's always going to be some kind of challenge, either now or down the road. For you and your experience working on this series, on this project as a whole, did you ever have a point where you hit a roadblock with writing, creativity? And if so, what were some ways that you overcame that?
I never really had a roadblock, but I would say not a roadblock like things stopped, but I would say that we had to put a lot of time into this project. It's not only just writing the stories, but it's designing the illustrations. It's taking the stories that are written and edit. You sending them to an editor for revision and comment. And I had a small circle of people I would send the stories to for their feedback as well. Um, it just took a lot of time, and it also takes money. I mean, I had to pay, we have to pay the artist to work on the book, we have to pay the editor. The books are available in French, so I had to pay for also it had to be translated into translation as well. And it wasn't it was that was probably the biggest challenge of it. It just took a lot of it was very resource intensive.
And this sounds like a complete passion project. Because when I say the word passion, I say that to emphasize that sometimes it is a lot of work, but at the same time, compared to someone else who might be doing it, you have, I would say, juice again. I'm gonna go with that word. You have that juice and
Oh
it's
yes,
inspiring you.
yes.
I didn't touch on that because even though it takes all that time and energy, you still got something that's kind of your secret sauce.
Hmm. I think so. And when I finally finished those books, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just not going to write again. I'm not going to go through that again. But guess what? I've already been working on two other books. One is two, both of them have been written. The next one is Natasha's going to start doing the final illustrations of the book, and it should come out, I would think, by September. And it's going to be called The Dance of Creation. And it's going to be the third volume, and it's going to be set in the same Old Grandmother's Tree universe. And then I have another story that talks about the end of Mitio Goku's life when she, just before, a few days before she's dying, as she's retelling the story of her life, and especially about the attack and its immediate aftermath. She's retelling that story to her granddaughter. And what really is going to make that story, I think, very touching also is that she's trying to pass on her knowledge and her culture of the Algonquin community that she came from, to pass it on to her granddaughter. Her granddaughter is of French and Algonquin. So she's kind of in between both worlds, but Mitio Goku wants to pass on that knowledge. And that's something that many of us face in our own families. Many of us have come to North America, from Europe or Africa or Asia. And there's always that tension of assimilation into a new culture, but trying to maintain that connection with the culture of our ancestors. So those are two of the stories that I'm working on right now. The Dance of Creation is the story that's coming out next at the end of the summer, and that one's actually going to be a prequel and a sequel. And so, well, how do you do that? Well, the story is going to be set 100 years from now, and in that setting, an Algonquin grandfather who is going to be a descendant of Mitio Goku is retelling the story of the creation of the world and all the trickster animal characters from the books. He's telling the story to his grandchildren around a campfire, but 100 years in the future. So it's a prequel in the sense that it goes back to the very beginning of the world itself, but it's also a sequel because it's set 100 years from now. And one of the reasons why I did that is I wanted readers to feel that the story, they are immersed inside the story. So Old Grandmother's Tree is not something that just happened in the past, but it's happening all around you. In fact, you're in a sense part of the story while you're reading it. And part of the story is actually going to unfold in the future.
That's a great concept. Once again, listen, I'm Refocused Radio, watching us online, talking to our guest today, Joseph Bolton. Go to his website, oldgrandmotherstree.com. Man, when you look at the impact of the work that you're doing, obviously by now you have reviews, you have people that are chiming in and letting you know what they think about your work. What's some of the things that you're seeing or realizing that is impacting people that are reading your material?
Well, I think one of the first things that when I explain the concept to someone who has no idea about the book, hasn't seen it yet, and I said, yeah, well, I wrote this series of folk tales about my ancestors in Quebec back in the 17th century and the early 20th century, and it's kind of a folklore story. They look at me like, how is that even going to work? I don't understand. How does it even fit? Is it a children's story? Is it an adult story? They don't really understand it. But when I take a physical copy of the books and I actually hand them to someone and they start thumbing through the illustrations and they start reading the stories and they realize that these are stories that they can read with their children and their grandchildren, that's where I get the positive feedback. And people are like, wow, I get this. I get it. And this is something I can share with my family. And oh, by the way, I like it too. As an adult, I find it very entertaining. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is that, as I mentioned, Mitio Goku, my ancestor, is Algonquin. So I've actually reached out to the Algonquin community in Ontario, in Canada, and I've shared the books with them. And they were very positive about the books. They really liked it. And in fact, there are some descendants of Mitio Goku that are living today within that community up in Ontario. And that's one of the reasons why the next book, as I said, is set in Canada by an Algonquin grandfather reading. I did that in honor of those friends and literally cousins that I met up in Ontario within the Algonquin community.
When you think about the legacy that you're leaving behind. I mean, inspired by true events, inspired by a true individual. If I'm kind of just creatively thinking of a question on the fly. If you were to sit under a real tree and you can listen to any historical figure tell their untold story, who would you be most interested in hearing speak their story?
It would definitely be Mitsuyo Goku. And I know that you say, well, you're already talking about her in the book, but definitely because only about 5 years ago I didn't even know she was my ancestor. I mean, it was a whole journey of discovery as I found that connection. First, it was through DNA tests with my mother, and then it was through the research on ancestry.com. It was connecting with other people who are also descendants of this woman. So I didn't know her, but I would love to connect to her and say, first to say to us is I would say, grandmother, look what I made for you to honor you and out of respect for you. And
That's
then
so cool.
I would love to hear her retell what her life's adventure was, because there's a whole story between that event, that tragic event that happened when she was 22 years old and she lost her family, all the way to the end of her life when um, a priest would write about her that she people would write about her that she lived a life of dignity, respect, and love. There's a whole series of adventures that I'd love to hear, and I'd love to hear that from her.
If you met a younger Joseph, what one sentence would you give to him as far as knowing what you know now?
I would say talk more to your grandparents and your aunts and uncles, your great aunts and great uncles, and capture those stories. Because I think one of the tragedies of being older, and I'm 61 now, is that you finally know what the right questions are to ask of your grandparents and your great aunts and uncles that you didn't even think about when you were 16. So that's what I would say. These are the things you need to talk to them about. These are the things you need to ask them about their life. This is the time for you to listen to hear their stories and capture that while they're still with you, because they won't be with you always. So that's what I would say to my younger self.
If someone's listening to us or watching us online, and obviously the best easy way they can do is support and buy your books. But if someone wanted to get involved or contribute to your mission of preserving untold stories, what's some ways that you think they'll be able to do that?
Well, first of all, yes, definitely buying the books. I'm not selling books to make money. I'm selling books because I want to tell a story and I want to leave a legacy behind after I'm gone. So visit the website. The website's got a Wikipedia. It's got some sample illustrations. It's got my biography. It's got the biography of Natasha Pelly Smith. It's got some other things on there too. It's pretty cool. Um, so that would be the first thing you do. And the other thing is, I always put out a call to action for one thing that's really important to me. The next book that I'm writing, as I mentioned, is called The Dance of Creation, and it's a set with a grandfather, Algonquin grandfather, retelling the story of the creation of the world to his grandchildren up in Ontario. What I really would love for that book is for it to be translated into the Algonquin language, which is an endangered language today. So I'm always asking if there's someone out there who's looking has resources, if they're looking to commit to a worthwhile project, this is what I would ask help with, because a translation of a language that's endangered can be very expensive, and translating this book into Algonquin it would be a expensive project. So that's probably what I would say. If you have resources, you're looking for something to do something with meaning, something to leave a legacy behind, I'm looking for support to have that book translated into the Algonquin language.
I like that. Well, if you're watching or you're listening, make sure you make a connection with Joseph today. And if someone heard that just now and they're like, well, I'm that person, or I think I
Hmm.
know someone who might be that person, what's the best way that they can shoot you an email, or is there a contact page on your website that they can tap into?
There is a contact on my webpage, but I would also say to that person who's looking to help, my email is Bolton, JE364 at gmail.com. So Bolton, JE364 at gmail.com. Or you can reach me through the contact page on the Old Grandmother's Tree website.
And man, time it just went by like a jet, man. But
It did.
when you think about the creative process that you touched on and how that's been making an impact in the reader community, let's touch on that. When you
Hmm.
have to wear all these different hats, you're on these different platforms promoting your work, what's some of the creative ways you see has been able to be not less stressed, because everything can be stressful, but it's how you manage it. But what I'm trying to say is, what has been working for you as a writer to get as much exposure to your work?
I think everyone who's a writer has different techniques. Some people write outlines and they plan whole stories and novels out. You know, big giant outline, they have it all written out. Um, I don't do it that way. I think the stories are within myself and they kind of percolate around deep within my imagination while I'm sleeping, while I'm sitting, and I first start seeing those stories come to life almost like a movie in my mind. And it reaches a point where it bursts out like a dam, and I have to sit front of the computer and actually type it out. And I'll type out a draft of the story, probably within a few hours, that first draft. So I think that if you are a writer, you have to kind of figure out don't you have to figure out what works for you. Maybe it's just let it going with your imagination, and when you feel that creative energy just bursting forth, then you sit down in front of the computer and you type it out. If writing an outline is what you need to do, then do that as well. But listen to you, feel within yourself how that rhythm of creativity works, and then follow it.
Once again, talking to Joseph Bolton, go to his website, oldgrandmotherstree.com. My last question I want to dive in is, people, humanity is important. Connection, that's important. Our legacy, what we leave behind, that's important. When you see how your stories are an inspiration to others, it may be inspiring people to connect better with their family. Because I love what you said earlier about connecting with that uncle, aunt, grandparents. What do you hope after tapping into your stories? Because obviously it might take them time to read all of them, but if someone starts reading your work, what do you hope they'll be able to take away from it in forming better connections with their friends and family?
I think I think it's definitely listening to your elders, especially. That's a very common theme. There's two themes that really stand out among many in that book, in those book series. One is listening to our elders and respecting our elders. And I don't think sometimes we don't do that enough nowadays. We get so wrapped up in the day to day, we forget about those who have come before us. And the second is the value of storytelling, of telling stories to each other and passing on stories to our children and our grandchildren, our nephews and nieces. That's the legacy. Of all the things that I have done in my life, those books are the things that I want people to talk about, and about 10 years, 20 years after I'm gone. And anyone reading those books, let's say 20, 30 years from now, and they found these books, dusted them off, they don't know who I am. They could read those books and they'll know me, because my voice is speaks through many of the characters in those stories.
Not a trick question, but it
Okay.
just hit my head, hit my mind, and I just want to bro with it. If you had the ability and resources to make an animation film or
Oh yeah.
cartoon series, how would you want to do it, man?
I would love to have it produced in Canada, and believe me, that is one of the goals. I'm glad you brought it because that's one of the goals for this book. Definitely. And there's somebody else listening out there is looking for a story to produce. This is it. It's ready to go. But what would I want? I would love to have it produced in Canada because the stories are based in Canada. I would. It would be important to me that the Indigenous First Nations characters in the book would be portrayed or voiced by First Nations Indigenous actors. Uh, so within the story itself, and I would love to see it like a Netflix miniseries, a series that honors the French Canadian heritage in Canada, in Quebec, and also honors the Algonquin and all First Nation peoples in Canada.
Love that. Well, if you want to support what our guest today, Joseph, is doing in his work and future work, go to his website, oldgrandmotherstree.com. Make sure you do it. All right. And don't just say you're gonna think about
Yes,
it and then 3 years go by. Who's this guy? No, like plant the seed and check it out. I'm gonna have him on again, so I'm gonna put the pressure on you guys. All right. I'm gonna
I
have
would be happy to come back.
future because I want the breaking news honor if you or when you turn this into some kind of moving picture. I'll just put it that way, so it'd be open ended, and whatever is meant to be, we'll
Yes.
see it come to fruition. But I would love to have down to have a breaking story on that, or if you just have other stories that you're publishing. Be glad to have you back on because what you're doing, I think, it has nothing but humanity in it, and I think it goes beyond our difference of opinion and different locations, and I think it will hit the heart in any block. So with that, I would say to you, Joseph, any last words you want to say to our viewers or listeners?
I just want to say thank you for spending time with me today, listening to this podcast, and I hope you will check out the website and buy the books and share them with your children, share them with your spouse, share them with your nephews and nieces and grandchildren, and you'll like it.
Well, like always, I want to say to Joseph, our guest today, thank you for your time, man.
Thank you very much.